maybe in 45 minutes or so's time, the folks will be able to judge whether they think I'm more eloquent than you or not. But can I just say as well, it's so nice to see everyone who's come along to the town hall tonight. We're really grateful for you being here, and we hope that you find it helpful. Just to let you know a couple of things before we get into the details. You'll notice up here on the screen I have a link to a website called Slido. We're going to have a question and answer session whenever I finish speaking, and once we do that, you can go to this website, this link, slido.com, and you enter the code that's at the bottom here, 4192714, just at the top of the bar on the web link. And then you can submit your questions that way, and that means you don't. I'm very happy to take questions from the audience if you want to shout them out. But I know that the Scots are a bit like the Irish. We're quite reserved. We don't like to shout out. Maybe you'll prove me wrong. If you want to do that, I'd be glad of that. But if you prefer to do it on your phone, you can go to Slido and put in the code, and you're free to do that now, or even as the talk is unfolding. I'll also just mention down at the back on the right hand side as you go out, we've got a table with some like booklets, little leaflets, a few Bibles, just different things. If you think any of them would be helpful for you, please take them. They're all free, so just take whatever you think might be useful. And if there's something that you're interested in, you'd like to read a bit more about, we don't have it, please let us know, and we'll try and get you sorted. Now, to come then to the topic for tonight and the topic for this week, we are considering this week some of life's big questions. Questions that I think need to be answered. And I think to a greater or lesser extent, everyone wonders who we are, what we are, why we're here, where we're going. These are questions that are on everybody's minds. Human beings are naturally inquisitive. We explore, we investigate, we consider. And you're here tonight. You've come particularly because you probably have questions, and maybe the question for this evening is of a particular interest to you. Now, as these talks have been arranged by the Christians from up the road at the Gospel Hall here in Lossiemouth, you're probably not going to be shocked that I'm going to try and answer these questions from the Christian position. We're here because we are convinced that there are answers to these questions, and actually they're found primarily in the Bible. But that doesn't mean that we are just going to sort of state brute facts. We're just going to put things out there and say, you have to believe it, and you just have to accept it. Maybe it doesn't make any sense to you. Well, that's too bad. You've just got to accept that. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that at all. We're just going to try and go down a number of different lines of thought, think about different factors and so on to demonstrate why we believe what we believe. But before I get into the specifics, I want to ask everyone here tonight a question. You just answer this in your own heart. If it was possible for me, and I don't think it is, but if it was possible for me to persuade you, to convince you, to demonstrate beyond all certainty, beyond all doubt, that there is a God, the Bible is true, that Jesus really did rise from the dead, all of these things, would you believe that? Would you accept it? Would you allow your life to be changed by that? Because some of us from the Gospel Hall have been going around the doors, and we've been knocking the doors and trying to talk to people, and I have asked almost everyone I have spoken to, I have asked that question. If I could prove this is true, would you accept it? And almost to a man, everyone has said, no, I wouldn't. So just think about the implications of that for a moment. The person is admitting that while they know the thing is true, or if they had been convinced that the thing was true, they still wouldn't accept it. They still wouldn't come to God. They still wouldn't receive Jesus as Saviour and Lord. They still refuse to believe it in their hearts. And why I'm saying that is it demonstrates to me what the problem in a lot of people's minds are. It's actually not really a problem in the mind. It's not an intellectual issue. It's a volitional issue. It's something in the heart. It's not that they don't believe that it's true. They don't want it to be true, and no amount of evidence or reasoning or proofs or discussions are ever going to make them think any different. Now, I suspect the fact that you've given up your Monday evening on this beautiful sunny evening in this most glorious part of the world to be here and listen to this, that you are open to the truth, that you're willing to consider these things. And that's all I guess we can ask you to do this week. It's just to be open, to consider a different perspective, maybe that you've thought about before, and to listen to what ultimately is sourced in the Bible. Now, tonight we're going to start at the start, as we should. We're going to ask this question: Is God real? Is there a God? And of course, this is no surprise to anyone that the Bible postulates that yes, there is indeed a God. That is the opening premise of the Bible, that there is a God who's outside of the material universe, who created the physical reality, the framework that we live in. And this is actually, some of you have Bibles with you, you can look it up if you want, or you can just look on the screen. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. You're not going to find it very difficult to find the very first words in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And this is the rock that the Bible is predicated on. Everything that follows after this, all 31,000 and whatever verses that come after Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, they only make sense, they only matter if there is a God. But of course, the reality is that not everyone agrees with that statement. And so the sub-question for tonight's consideration is: hasn't science disproved belief in the supernatural? Hasn't science disproved belief in the supernatural? And I've chosen that question for a very particular reason. It's actually personal to me in many ways, and I'll not get into this just now, but in many ways it set me off on the journey that finds me here giving this talk in this place tonight. Whenever I was in high school, maybe about 15 years old, I was walking home from school with one of my friends, and I don't know what came into my friend's mind, but as we were walking along, he had been brought up in a very sort of similar environment. We were both brought up in Christian families. We both knew a lot about the Bible. We'd been to church services hundreds and hundreds of times, and we're walking along, and he said to me, "Joel, are you a Christian? Are you saved?" And I kind of looked at him. I said, "Yes, Matty, I am. I'm saved. I am a Christian. Are you?" And he kind of hesitated for a second. He said, No, I'm not." And I said, "Oh," knowing that he had been brought up in the same environment, parents bringing him along to Sunday school, Bible clubs, all those other things. This is strange. I said, Why not?" And he said, "Well, I don't think it's true." "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, I think science disproves the Bible. I think science disproves the Bible." And on that occasion, I stood there opening and closing my mouth like a goldfish, because I had no idea what to say to him. I'd never thought about it. I just always assumed that this was the way things are. And here's someone who actually has a really similar background to me, and he's challenging this, and I have never ever thought about it. Now, that was about 18 years ago. In that time, I've thought about that question a lot. And I really think that it's simply not true. It is simply not true that science has disproved belief in God or has disproved the Bible. And we want to think about some things that will help us perhaps to come to that understanding. First of all, I want us to think about this, and I hope you can see that. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but at least you can listen, even if you can't see particularly well. The first thing that I want to think about is the fact that science cannot disprove belief in God. It's not just that it doesn't, it can't. Now, people in our society, we live in a scientific and technological era. We rely on scientists and scientific endeavour a lot. And so we kind of have this idea that everything can be proved by science. Science has the answers for absolutely everything. And I've heard, maybe this phrase will help kind of sum it up. People say something like this: all truth comes from science. All truth comes from science. The problem with that statement is that it claims to be a truth, and it doesn't come from science. You can't take that statement and put it in a jar and perform experiments in it in a laboratory. It's a philosophical proposition. It's a worldview statement. It is essentially a statement of faith, but it is not something that you can prove by scientific means. And so the first main point that I really want to make is that science, in and of itself, it cannot disprove God. It's not just that it doesn't disprove God, but it actually can't. By its very nature, by virtue of what science is, it is impossible for science to disprove God. And the reason I say all of those things is because science is the study of the natural world. It's the study of the physical realm. And as such, it can only consider things that are natural. It can only consider things that are physical. But the Bible and what Christians believe about God, we believe that God is not a physical being. He is not a natural being. And therefore, the study of God cannot sit within the realm of the study of science, because they're looking at completely different things. God is not a physical or natural being. He sits outside of the material universe. Yes, he can interact with it, but he's not part of it. He's not a natural being. He's not physical. So the way, maybe to give you an illustration will help you understand the point that I'm trying to make. Trying to understand God, trying to discover God by scientific means alone is a little bit like trying to find the engineer who designed and built your car by pulling the car apart. And I don't know anything about cars, but you can take the whole car to bits, every nut, every bolt, lay them all out on the ground. You won't find the engineer in the car. He's not there. He's not part of the car. But the fact that the car exists suggests, I think it does more than suggests, it insists the necessity of the engineer. It insists on the necessity of the designer. So we can try and pull the physical universe apart. We can look at it in a microscopic way or in a telescopic way. We can look all around the physical universe, and then when we don't find God in it, we say, oh, God doesn't exist. But that doesn't really work, because God isn't physical. He's not natural. He is not part of the physical universe. And so to try and find God by just considering science and science alone is actually a logical fallacy called a category error. It's looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing. It's like using a microscope to try and find out what something sounds like. There's nothing wrong with a microscope, but that's just not what it does. That's not its purpose. And the same thing applies with trying to apply scientific criteria and scientific study to God. It's a category error. We just cannot understand God in that way. There's nothing wrong with science, by the way. We are not, don't think for a second that we are anti-science, but science cannot, by its very nature, it cannot tell you everything. And the fact that physical laws and biological processes, all of those things within the material universe exist, the fact that all of those things are there, I would say, insists upon the necessity of a designer, of a creator who sits outside of that physical universe. But I want to move on now and think about another point. Not only is it true, is it the case that science cannot disprove God, but I also want to think of the reality that science points to God. And there are things about the study of science that the best explanation for these observations that we make from the natural world is that there is a God who created the sun, the moon, the stars, and everything that exists in the physical realm. And to do that, to substantiate that claim, I want to make two arguments. One is called the cosmological argument, and one is called the intelligent design or fine-tuning argument. And just by thinking through these, hopefully we will come to a position where we're in a better position to say whether or not God exists. So, first of all, the cosmological argument, it goes something like this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Things don't just randomly appear. I don't know if a car just appeared right there sitting in front of us. We would think that was a very unusual thing, because, well, where did it come from? What was the cause? Things don't just appear out of nothing. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Now, every single member, as far as I'm aware, of the scientific community is absolutely united in agreement on the fact that the universe had a beginning. That wasn't the case 200 years ago. 200 or 300 years ago, and before that, most of the naturalistic, atheistic argument against the existence of God was that the universe is eternal, and therefore you could do away with the need for God. But no one argues that anymore, because we all know that the universe, and people might debate about when that beginning point is, but we all know that the universe had a starting point. So then it must follow, if everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, then therefore it necessarily follows that the universe has a cause. Now, whenever I mention this line of thought to people, the response that I get 100 times out of 100 without fail, people then say, well, what created God? What is the cause for God? But you'll notice that what I said earlier, I was very careful in the words that I chose. The first line, the first premise of the cosmological argument is this: everything that begins to exist has a cause. Not everything begins to exist. There are some things, like, for example, the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. These things, they don't have a beginning, they don't have an ending, they just are. And therefore it is completely logically consistent to conceive of a personal being who also has no beginning and no ending, who just simply is. There is no reason why we would consider that to be a logically incoherent thing to believe. So the universe has a beginning, it has a cause, and if we consider that, if space, matter and time, this is what the universe really is, it's the space-time continuum, that is the point that the universe began to exist is the point at which space, matter and time began to exist. Then, necessarily the thing, whatever it was that brought the universe into existence, must be outside of space, matter and time. It can't be bound by those things, because the beginning of the universe was the point at which all of those things began to exist. So the thing that is behind the universe cannot be bound by space, time and matter. You also need something that is personal, because to choose to create, to be the cause, you need to be able to make a choice. And only a personal being, an impersonal being, cannot make a choice. Only a personal being can make a choice. The being must also be of immense intelligence and power to be able to actually affect this majestic creation. So what you end up with, as we put all of those bits and pieces together, you end up with a spaceless, timeless, or, if you'll allow another word, eternal, immaterial, or spiritual being, which is personal, intelligent, and has immense power. Now, I haven't used the word that you're hopefully all thinking that describes what I've just been describing. It's God. Spaceless, eternal, beginningless, causeless, non-physical, personal, intelligent, and powerful. And just by mere logic, and logic can't tell you everything either, by the way, but just by pure logic, we can arrive at this conclusion that behind the universe there must be something that fulfills all of these criteria, and the only thing that fulfills all of these criteria is God. The existence of the universe, it requires an explanation. We cannot just ignore that fact. So, and as we leave this point, and I want to come now to the intelligent design, the fine-tuning argument, but as we leave this point, there are at least 4 questions that I have put to people who are of an atheistic worldview that need to be answered, and I've never heard anyone come close to answering these questions. The questions are: how did something come from nothing? How did order come from chaos? How did life come from non-life? How do immaterial, non-physical things like thoughts, feelings and emotions, how do they come just from physical matter? There is no answer to these things if there is no God. But I want to come now, I'm conscious of how time is moving, I want to think now about the intelligent design or fine-tuning argument. And this simply says that the physical universe, it bears the hallmarks of design. It is too complicated, it is too sophisticated to have come about as the result of random chemical reactions and physical acts of physical forces working upon each other. And so there's a lot of things that we could consider here. And my background is not in science, but there's a lot of things that we could consider here. An example of that might be the human genome. The human genome is the set of DNA instructions that are contained in every single cell of the human body, and it's made up of a complex code of 3 billion nucleotides. Now, I don't even really sure that I know what that means, but you can either go and Google it, or what is sometimes simple to help us think of what a nucleotide is. It's like a letter, and these letters are arranged in a very precise and specific order, and if that order is not right, if that order does not work, then human life simply does not exist. So 3 billion letters in a specific sequence for human life to exist. Just to give you the context of what that looks like, if you were to write that out on a piece of paper or on a page on your computer, write it out times New Roman size 12, that would be about 800,000 pages long of letters in a very precise sequence and order. Now let me give you something to compare that with. Suppose you are out walking along the beach, and you have beautiful beaches in this part of the world. Edinburgh's a nice city, but I don't think it can compare to the beauty that you find around Lossiemouth. But anyway, that's my cross to bear. I have to head back down on Friday, and you all get to stay here. But you go along, walking along the beach, and as you're walking along the beach, you see a message written in the sand, and it says something like this. I don't know, John loves Sally. 14 letters. Now you look at that, and what you know immediately, you might not necessarily think all of this through, but you know immediately that something with a mind put that there. That's information. Information only comes from a mind. You would never suggest in a million years that well, maybe the waves came in and washed the sand in a particular format, or the wind blew and that those letters just arrange themselves. You and I know that such a suggestion is absolutely preposterous. That's just not the way things work. Now, you might argue about how those letters got there. You might say, did the person dig with their hands, or did they dig with a spade, or did they drive a digger down onto the beach? You might debate about how long they have been there. There's a whole lot of questions that you might have around those things, but what you'll be forced to conclude is that a mind put that information there. Now, we know that for 14 little letters, a little love message written on the sand. We all accept that. But what we are supposed to then accept from a naturalistic or atheistic worldview is this potential that 3 billion letters, infinitely more sophisticated information, that didn't come from a mind. That data, that information, it just appeared. It just by chance, as a result of chaos and random forces, that just emerged as it did. I'm sorry, I just don't see how it makes sense that 14 letters needs a mind behind it, but 3 billion doesn't. To put it like this, I don't really have enough faith to be an atheist. I just cannot see how that there's not a creative force, an intelligent designer behind the universe and behind something so sophisticated as the human genome. So, we've thought about those things. Hopefully that has been helpful. We've thought about the reasons why, and we could go on. Some people have written books that are yawn thick about the existence of God. I've only spoken for 25 minutes or so. But what are the implications of that? So God exists. Why should you and I care? What difference does that make? Well, if God exists, that changes everything. Literally everything. It takes our otherwise pointless lives, meaningless lives, and it confers upon them meaning and dignity and value and significance. You see, without God, there is no such thing as good or evil. Without God, when all is said and done, our lives will just end in the cold, dark nothingness of annihilation. But if God exists, then that means that everything that you do, everything that you love, everything that you are, it matters. You matter. But God matters more. And the Lord Jesus, He explained this when he was here. One day someone asked him about taxation. I don't know if they expected him to go as deep as he did, but he answered their question with a question. He said, they asked, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And he said, show me a denarius or a penny. And then he said, whose image and inscription does it have? They answered and said, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. The point he's making is that this is Caesar's currency. This is Caesar's possession. And therefore you must render to him what is due to him, even if you don't want to. And we don't like paying taxes in modern Britain and modern Scotland any more than people like paying taxes in Israel and Palestine 2,000 years ago. But that's not the point. It bears the inscription of the Caesar. It's his possession. It's his currency. So therefore the Lord Jesus is saying you must render to him what is due to him, because it's Caesar's and he makes the rules. But then he went on, and this is where he really elevated their understanding and took their sort of petty squabble and discussion about something every day, and he elevated it to this understanding of who and what we are. And he went on and he said, render unto therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. Caesar is not the only person who must receive what is due to him. And the Lord Jesus, by doing this, he's taking us all the way back to the beginning, where in Genesis chapter 1, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Now there is a lot packed into those verses, and we could take the rest of the time and maybe beyond to discuss that. But a simple point that we can understand is this: God makes the rules. It's him who decides what our purpose in life is. It's up for us then to follow the rules, to obey the rules. God has made the game, if you like, and we must play in accordance with the way he has designed the reality, the physical framework, the spiritual framework that we live in, because all of us one day we're going to stand before God. And we're going to give account to God for what we have done and why we have done it. Now this, a lot of people think this is God just being really mean, being really capricious and harsh on us. There's this idea about that God is some kind of cosmic spoil sport. He's looking down from heaven. He wants to see who's enjoying themselves and having a good time. And as soon as he finds that, then he wants to put a stop to it and just ruin everyone's life. That could not be further from the truth. That is not God's character. That's not his disposition towards you. You see, God, the reality is this: God created you for him. He knows that because of that, the only way for you to find true joy, find real rest, real hope in your life, is to be in a relationship with him, because that is the way that he created you to be. And this is very powerfully illustrated for us in the first chapter of the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1, when God created various things, he spoke to the arena, to the habitat or to the environment that those things need to be in to grow and to live and to flourish. So when he created plants, God, he spoke to the ground and he said, let the earth bring forth, and the different types of plants are listed. Whenever he created fish and marine life, he didn't speak to the ground, he spoke to the seas. He spoke to the oceans and he said, let the seas spring forth, and then the different types of marine life are listed. When it came to the creation then of mankind, God didn't speak to the ground, he didn't speak to the seas, he didn't speak to the air, he spoke to himself. And he says, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. So God created man in his own image. What are we supposed to understand from that? Well, we're supposed to follow the logic through. We're supposed to follow the thought through and realize this, that God, if you will, is the environment, the habitat that you and I are meant to exist in. Now, if we want to grow and to flourish and to live, we need to be in a relationship with God. Now, To go back to the example of the plant or the fish, it is possible for you to look at those things and say, well, as they are not free. So here's a tree or a bush, and it's stuck in the ground, and its roots hold it there, and it can't move about. It's not free. So I'm going to come along, and I'm going to free the plant, and I'm going to rip it out by the roots. And you can do that. You can take it out of the ground, and you can say, there you go, I've set it free. But what have you done? You've killed it. The same thing applies to the fish. You can come along and say, well, look, here's this fish swimming along, trapped in the water. It can't get out of the water. It can't be free the way it is. So I will set it free. I will release it from the position that it's held in. And so you come along, you take the fish out of water, and you set it on the ground, and you say, there you go, it's free. And in a sense, that's true, but what have you done? You've killed it, because on both occasions you've severed it from the source of life. You've taken it out of the environment, the habitat that it needs to be in to live and to grow and to flourish. Now let's follow the line of thought through. Again, we are meant to abide in God. We're meant to be in a relationship with Him. You don't have to be. You can say, I'm not going to be dictated to by some higher power. I'm not going to listen to what some book says. I'm not going to go to some church. You are free to do that. You're free to refuse that. But what are you doing whenever you do that? You're severing yourself from the one thing, from the one person who can give you life. Friends, tonight I want to leave you with this thought. With this, I will more or less conclude. And I think Ben's going to come up, and we'll see how we've got on with some of the questions. Satisfaction is being in a right relationship with God, enjoying His grace and His presence in your life. And there is nothing like knowing that you are in that, because even though you had gone away from God, even though for most of your life you had refused, you'd been like the plant out of the ground, like a fish out of water, you'd refused to submit to what God said, and I am just the same as you. But because of the death of the Son of God, it tells us that God loved us so much, that Christ loved us so much, that He was willing to give Himself for us. And tonight I go home and I lay my head on the pillow, and I have this astonishing knowledge that I was a guilty sinner, but Jesus died for me. He loved me, and He gave Himself for me. And friends, there is nothing more liberating, more joyful, more hopeful, more wonderful than that. And so the implications, if there is a God, and hopefully we've seen tonight that there are very good reasons that we should believe that there is a God, we should then seek that God. We should seek to live in harmony with Him. That is only possible through the Lord Jesus Christ. We'll deal with that in more detail, God willing, on Thursday night and Friday night. But hopefully that has been at least a little bit helpful to you. And I'm going to ask Ben, as you're on tonight, to come up and maybe think about some of these questions. Thanks for listening, folks.
Don't worry, I'm not going to be answering them. So, no, there's just a couple. My signal's not that great in here, so hopefully people are putting them up. They're getting through. But so the first one that's here is how can faith and reason, faith and then reason and science be compatible? So how can you bring those two things together? I suppose.
That's a good question, Ben. Yeah, thanks. So I think there is a popular view around that faith is anti-intellectualism. I actually noted a quote down. I'll give you the quote and I'll tell you who said it. The person said, science without faith is lame, and religion without science is blind. Science without faith is lame. The person who said those words was called Albert Einstein. You might have heard of him, and there was a great mind who recognised that actually that both the belief in God and that science were not only not incompatible, but they actually needed to go together. It was necessary that these two things work together. But there is very much this idea, and I think the new atheism movement, which was probably more popular maybe 15 years ago than it is now, but very much the premise, one of the main premises of that movement was that that science was kind of the belief in spite of evidence, not science, faith was the belief in certain things because in spite of the lack of evidence, maybe even because of the lack of evidence. I think Richard Dawkins said that in the Edinburgh Science Festival a number of years ago. But the problem with that, there's a few different issues with that. Number one, that is not what faith means. That's not what faith means in any context, whether it's speaking about belief in God or really any context at all. So, for example, if you wanted to go down to Edinburgh tonight, you could come to me, you could say, Joel, can you give me a lift down? That's something that I can do for you. It's something that I am capable of doing. But if you came to me and said, Joel, I'd like some brain surgery, I'm afraid I'm not your guy. I might be willing to help, but I can't help you. I don't have the skills, I don't have the training that is necessary for that. And I think you would know that. You wouldn't put your faith in me to do that. Now, why would you not put your faith in me to do that? Is it because of lack of evidence? Is it because you're kind of an idiot? No, it's because of evidence. You know that I don't have the credentials. You know that I don't have the ability. And so faith in any context, it necessarily is based on evidence. Now, sometimes Christians have given a negative kind of view on that, and they've opened the doors of criticism to men like Richard Dawkins. But science and faith are not incompatible. And another point I would make alongside that is that atheists have faith as well. Everyone makes assumptions about things that they cannot prove. So, for example, the statement, I don't believe in God, that's a statement of faith. You can't prove that. For you to be able to prove that, you would need to be able to know everything about everything. Things that are seen, things that are unseen, things that have existed in the past, things that will exist in the future, things inside the universe, outside the universe. You need to know absolutely everything about everything. And of course, if you have that knowledge, then God does exist because you are God, because only God has infinite knowledge. But to go back just to make that point again, that statement, I don't believe in God, and I'm not saying that a person is an idiot because they make that statement, but I'm just saying that's a statement of faith. Again, you'll get people saying things like, well, I have confidence that science will give us a naturalistic explanation to the origin of the universe. Again, a statement of faith. You have no way of proving that. You have no reason. You have nothing upon which you can demonstrate that is a necessary truth. And so those things are demonstrations that everyone has faith, whether it's in a religious or worldview context, or whether it's in an everyday context. Faith must necessarily be based on evidence, and faith that isn't based on evidence isn't faith that honours God. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, thanks.
Another couple come through. Next one. Can you clarify why God would want to have a relationship with us if we have been so sinful?
That's a good question. Very good question. The honest answer to that, I'll answer it in two ways. The first part of that is I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know why God would want a relationship with me after I consider all that I am and all that I have done. It's not really logical that God would love me, but that is the second part of my answer. It doesn't make sense, but God is love, and that is His character. And I really like the tone of that question, because a lot of questions that I get on topics like this almost act as if God really owes us something, but that question clearly indicates someone who's thinking, well, God doesn't owe us anything, and why does He? He doesn't owe us anything. But the character and the nature of God is that He is a loving being, and so therefore He wants the best for us. So I'm a little bit going off on a tangent on this, but it's such a good question. What we can understand from that then is that God's commandments are for our blessing and for our benefit. They are for our good. All the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots, God didn't put them there to ruin your fun. They are not about making you miserable. They are about more pleasure and more joy, both now and forever. And this is another thing that's brought out early on in the book of Genesis. The notion that we have, and even this is even true of people who are Christians. This is sometimes even, I wouldn't say this out loud, but sometimes how my mind works. You sort of think that your life will be better without God in it. That's a lie. It seems plausible. It seems like it will be better to live on your own terms and to do things apart from God, but that is simply not true. Why? Because God loves us, even in spite of the fact that we have gone against Him. We have consistently and persistently refused His rule and His reign in our lives. Sometimes people say we are broken creatures, and that is true. We are broken, but we're more than that, because washing machines break. We are rebels. We have deliberately gone against God, but for some reason it's not, and I've been trying to use quite a lot of logic tonight. For some reason it's not really logical, because God is love. He still wants to be with us. He wants to forgive us. He wants to enjoy our relationship with us, not just now, but for all of eternity. So hopefully that answers that question too. Thanks, Ben.
Just another couple here. So, is there a difference between intelligent design and creation?
I guess they're different terms, but they both imply the same thing. They both imply that there is a designer, that there is a creator behind the universe. One of the things I always say on this, one of the objections that is used often against the existence of God is the theory of evolution. Now, I'm not going to get into the theory of evolution tonight. I don't really accept it. I certainly don't accept all of its propositions. But what I would say is that even if evolution is true 100%, as Darwin theorized it, it still does absolutely nothing to remove the need for God, because evolution, the word means it means the process by which things change. It doesn't explain how life began. That's not what that word means. So evolution is how things change. It never purported to explain how life began. So even if the universe is 13.4 billion years old and all the rest of it, that doesn't matter. That doesn't prove anything, because there's still that question: how does something come from nothing? How does life come from non-life? How does order come from chaos? How do things that are immaterial, like thoughts, feelings, and emotions, excuse me, how do they, those are clearly real things, we feel them all, but how, if those things exist but they're not physical things and all that exists is physical, how do we explain those things? I can't really see a logical explanation to that outside of belief in God. And I've kind of gone down that reef. The question didn't use the word evolution, but I just wanted to draw out that distinction. Often those two terms are set against each other. They're not necessarily fully contradictory. I appreciate that there are some conflicts but between a sort of intelligent design argument or young Earth creation view and evolution, of course. But even when all is said and done, if you step way back, the need for belief in God is not removed by things like that. So to come back then to the question, sorry I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. It's an Irish thing. We call it the gift of the gab. It means we can't shut up. Basically, I don't really think there's a great difference between intelligent design and creation. I think they're just different words to explain the same concept.
Just got one more on here. Obviously, there's still time if anyone's wanting to put in a last minute one. So this one is: does it matter what I believe? Is it not enough just to have faith in something?
that kind of, I don't know, leads on from some of the stuff that we've been thinking about tonight, and that's a common view in our sort of society, in our world. That as long as I believe in something, then I'll kind of be all right. But that is not the way faith works. The important thing about faith is not the amount of faith that we have, it's about what our faith is placed in. So I'll give you an example, a very tragic example that just springs to mind of something I heard about that happened a number of years ago in Nigeria. So in this part of Lagos, which I think is the capital of Nigeria, there was quite a poor community where a lot of the young children had a problem with their guns. It was very uncomfortable, and they were unwell because of it. It wasn't sort of the sort of thing that would have taken their lives, but it wasn't pleasant for them at all. So their parents kind of got together and they decided they would go into another part of the city and they would try and look for someone who had a cure. And they found a man who said, yeah, I've got what you need here. You take this substance, buy it off me, pay a lot of money, take it, apply it to the children's guns, and that'll cure them. So the parents, in good faith, took the substance, they gave it to their children, but what they didn't know was the substance contained antifreeze, and when they put it on the mouths of the children and continued to do that over a period of time, eventually it killed something like 100 or 120 of the boys and girls died. Now that's very tragic, and it illustrates a very important point. Those boys and girls, they didn't die because of a lack of faith. They really believed. They were convinced that this would work, but they believed in the wrong thing. Their confidence was misplaced, and that's why it doesn't so much matter what you believe. It matters what you believe in. It's not your subjective strength of faith. It's what your faith is placed in. And the Apostle Paul writes about this towards the end of his life in 2 Timothy. He's about to be executed for his stand for the gospel, is continuing to preach the gospel. So he writes to his friend Timothy, and he's considering his death, and he says, I know whom I have believed, and I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed to him against that day. He doesn't say, I know what I believed, really, or when I believed, or where I believed, or how I believed. He said, I know who I believed. And I think this is the ultimate thing about faith. It's not about the strength of the person's faith. It's about the strength of the object that the faith is placed in. And hopefully that's a good question, because it sort of sits alongside what we've been considering tonight. Is it reasonable? Is it logical to believe in God? Well, hopefully we've answered that, yes. But hopefully we also understand that we have to come to God as He has revealed Himself. We can't just pick and choose what God is like. We must believe in God as He is and as He has revealed Himself. So is that the end of the questions, Ben? That's grand. Does anyone want to shout out from the floor or anything? Any other questions? Going, gone. That's grand. I thought that might be the case. It's a little bit easier to do it do it online and anonymously rather than shouting it out. Just to wrap up, I want to leave you with a quote. Actually, I've mentioned this man a couple of times tonight. Maybe I'm giving him too much of a press. Richard Dawkins. He wrote a book called The God Delusion. It was quite a famous one a number of years ago. And in the dedication of that book, he wrote these words: "Isn't it better to be satisfied with the beauty of a garden without needing to imagine there's a fairy at the bottom of it?" Now that sounds like quite a clever argument, but no one goes into a beautiful garden and says, "Oh, there must be fairies in this garden." They go into a beautiful garden and they say, "There must be a gardener who made the garden this way." The same applies with the universe. No one is suggesting that because the universe exists that there are fairies. Sorry if I've shattered anyone's illusions tonight, but no one actually suggests that. No one thinks that way. But what we do say whenever we look at something that's much more complex and much more sophisticated, much more beautiful than a garden, the universe itself, we say, well, there must be a divine gardener. There must be a cause. There must be a creator behind that. And so, in that respect, I would leave you with this comment: faith is not a leap in the dark. Faith is not a leap in the dark. It's a step into the light. And it would be really good if tonight, or maybe over the course of the week, someone would step into the light, not just believe in God. It's not belief in God is not enough to get you into heaven. It's faith in Christ, coming to Him, repenting of our sin against God and trusting in Him, that we are given by God's free grace. We are given a guaranteed place in heaven. That's all for tonight, folks. Really appreciate you coming along. Don't rush off. I think Liz has just gone in to put on the kettle again. There'll be teas and coffees. Please stay around, have a chat. Help yourself to the literature at the back, and if you can come back again at 6:30 or 7 o'clock tomorrow night and bring anyone with you, we'd be delighted to have you. Thank you very much.